Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Armand Plays, but we're going back to something that I started a while back. It's more of going back to the Pathfinder character creation. I know I said I was actually going to get back to it and come off with a part 2 or so, but this is actually something I figured I need to actually address more, even though I know it's been a while. What I'm going to be talking about is primarily a few of the core classes throughout this. Give my opinion, because the fact is, that's one thing I forgot to go over with that one there, and it's something I've been actually working towards. Now, we'll be talking about the druid for this one. And I know when normally you think druid, when you play RPG games, you think balance keeper normally. And there's major misconception when it comes down to the druid class on its own. And that's how you have to ultimately abide by making everything neutral, everything balanced here, balanced that, and you have to do it or you're not going to get anywhere. Which to an extent that is true. To the point being that you do have some things you need to actually keep balance of. But the fact is, it doesn't mean you have to ultimately stop yourself from actually surviving, of sorts. Like example, if you're being attacked by a creature, and the fact is, it's something that will kill you at that point. You need to actually defeat it so your character will live. I know I'm giving bad examples of this, mind you. First thing to keep in mind when playing a druid is you have to be some form of neutral, especially for Pathfinder. When you're playing a druid on its own, depending on what type of RPG you play, depends if it's like you have to be straight neutral, or you can be more flexible, where you can be some form of neutral, but you can be like neutral good, neutral evil, that kind of thing. But when it comes down to the neutrality aspect, you do keep balance to a degree, to an extent at least. But when it comes down to it, it's not exactly a thing where you interfere with everything, trying to keep balance. It's more, even if an entire city gets destroyed, or you save a city from being destroyed, it doesn't exactly offset to balance anything. That is one thing I really want to address and stress out with when it comes down to the druids, ultimately for tabletop RPGs. Now, when it comes down to playing a druid, you have very limited weapon and armor proficiencies. You have very minor things you can use, because if you use outside of your proficiencies, normally at least, there's some cases where you can actually gain new proficiencies. And if your DM's nice, you can actually use certain other things tailored to your campaign setting without actually losing all the powers of your druid. When it comes down to it, you have multiple different weapon types. As a suggestion, I suggest going with certain weapons, like with a Sylvan Scimitar. The scimitars are one of the weapons you are proficient with. Or let's say like a long spear, or short spear, whichever one it was. I believe it's short. Doing so, you have better reach to a degree, but when it comes down to the scimitar, it gives you decent damage with a decent critical rate, which truthfully also brings us to the next part of this. Technically, what kind of druid you want to play. There are several different types of druids, not going to archetypes for this one, but there are several different ways you can play a druid. You can play a druid that literally focuses on the wild shape, or the magical side, or a mixture of sorts. When playing a druid, there is a very important part of it. At first level, you gain a animal companion or a domain. Selective amount of domains, mind you. But when you choose, ultimately, it'll help flesh out what type of character you want to build. Choosing an animal companion, you can actually play several different ways. You can actually, depend on what type of animal companion you choose, depends on exactly what benefit it will give you, of course. There's nothing wrong with going the straight, stereotypical wolf, ultimately. It can be really helpful, especially when you're actually wild shaping. Because when you wild shape, you could actually go up as a pair of wolves at that point and actually maul, trip, and things like that. Of course, when it comes down to wild shape, there was multiple things to take into consideration. Starting at 4th level, you gain the ability to wild shape once per day, and then every couple of levels thereafter you gain additional use of it, up to at will by 20th level if you don't take any alternative capstone ability. Now, when it comes down to the wild shape itself, there's actually several different versions, depending on what archetype you play. But as straight druid, you do gain the ability to turn into an animal up to B shape 3 eventually. No magical beasts, by the way, just animals. Elemental body 4, was it? I don't remember exactly which elemental body went up to. I just remember you actually got elemental body. You do get plant shape as well, but in the grander scheme of things, no offense to anybody who likes this part, it's literally, the plants are not going to be as much of a thing you'll probably be relying on, especially since you get it so late inside the build, for any wild shape based build, at least. Which really can actually help determine what type of animal companion you actually want to choose. Because there's several ones you can actually choose. If your DM's kind enough, you can actually choose like the rock as a animal companion, because it is statted out. But pretty much it just helps to actually determine what type of companion you are actually having, to help determine your playstyle to a degree. You could have your animal companion actually go up and distract the enemy while you're literally laying down battlefield control, or summoning other animals to help actually benefit the group by adding another body there at least. I know Summon Nature's Ally isn't as powerful as Summon Monster, but it's decent for what it is. Now, which brings up to the next point. Going with the domain, you gain the domain powers of the cleric of that domain. You also gain the domain spells, if I remember correctly. Now, depending on which one you choose, depending on what you specialize as, if anything, I highly suggest, when you're talking about going off from build to build, really specializing more for a transmutationist or conjuration type of character. It's because primarily, from what I've noticed myself at least, that the transmutation and the conjuration are the stronger of the spell schools for them. Like example, Entanglement is a really good universal spell. You actually gain different versions of it, excluding Burning Entanglement. Burning Entanglement is a different one altogether. On its own, it causes you to deal damage and entangle a creature. Now, it's evocation, not transmutation, but it's for like sickening entanglement, so on and so forth. And so, if you're doing a spellcasting build or combination of spellcasting and wild shape, I highly suggest actually picking up like spell focus, transmutation, and conjuration. Conjuration because you don't really want to actually knock out any of your good conjuration spells, because you have a good number, truthfully, to be able to not only just summon creatures, but also lay down more battlefield control on its own. Now, when using the combination, you really want to pick up on natural spell, because the fact is, without natural spell, you cannot be inside your wild shape and cast. That is a downside to the druid. I highly suggest picking it up at 5th level, which is the minimum level you can actually pick it up. Now, when picking it up, there is a couple of things to note. It'll enable you for any form you actually wild shape to be able to cast spells, which means you could actually use the wild shape as a get out of dodge way of doing things. Basically, let's say you're doing a casting version and you still actually want to go with a version of the druid that has the wild shape. You could literally be a bird flying over the battlefield, casting spells to entangle enemies or summoning creatures to fight for you. That's just one example. Well, two technically. But when you're going through with the druid, there's a couple of things, of course, to think about, as we've already discussed. Now, one thing to really note is that the druid can actually fall into the category of a healer relatively easily. They gain, I believe, almost all the healing spells that a cleric would actually be able to gain of their level. They don't have to follow a deity, mind you, which is another bonus for them being a spellcaster, even though they're divine. And they are actually prepared, which is, it's a neutral thing on its own. If you have the right spells prepared, you're good. If you don't, well, you're not exactly going to be too good in combat. I mean, for a spellcaster variation. But in doing so, you do gain all the spells like a cleric does. And with that, you can actually spontaneously cast at first level Summon Nature's Ally 1, and every time you actually gain a new spell level, you can actually spontaneously cast any Summon Nature's Ally spell of that level. So when you get access to second level spells, you can actually spontaneously cast Summon Nature's Ally 2, and so on and so forth, up to the maximum of 9 at 9th level spells. Which is a good thing there, because the fact is, if you're going to be playing a druid, I do not suggest actually preparing any Summon Nature's Ally spell. You could if you want to, but the fact is I don't suggest it. Because you can spontaneously cast, there's no point you actually preparing it. You just cast it in place of a spell slot of that level. Now, some really good spells I suggest actually preparing is things like Campfire Wall. Entanglement is an obvious one, and any of the variations of it. There are, of course, a lot of different spells, but Call Lightning is a really good spell. Ultimately, on its own as a spell, it'll let you be able to call down a number of bolts per the spell casting, having one call down per round. And in doing so, you can actually attack from range at that point. So for a spellcaster variation, it is very useful to have as an offensive spell. Now, keep in mind you do gain spells like Flame Strike. Nothing says bad day for an undead or a demon like a good Flame Strike. It deals half fire, half holy, which makes so you can deal double half the damage against undead. And it's really effective against demons on its own. It primarily depends on what type of game setting you're playing in, depends how useful it'll be. Now, there's always more spells to actually go over, but the fact is I'm not going to go into too many, because there are really useful spells, but there's too many to go over, truthfully. Some other notable spells, especially for higher level, you gain Shape Change as a 9th level spell. So any of those shape-changing spells you would like to get a hold of that you don't have, you can actually use at 9th level spells. I know it is a long wait, but it's actually useful to have nonetheless. So that gives you access to a wide range of different forms you can use outside of your natural abilities. Now, at other feats I actually take for when you're playing a wild shape based druid, I highly suggest going with like Energized Wild Shape and Quick Wild Shape. Now, Quick Wild Shape, on the level you get it at, you need to at least have the Wild Shape class feature, and that's primarily with any Wild Shape feat. Now, what it does is ultimately, when you get it, you can actually use your Wild Shape as a swift action or a move action. If it's a move action, you can actually Wild Shape like usual, but it actually acts as if you're a druid of your level -2 for the purpose of what wild shape you can actually use. And for a swift action, it counts your level as -4 for what wild shape you can actually turn into. It's a good way because eventually it won't actually matter with some of your wild shapes. Going up to like B shape 3, you get huge sized animals, and I believe tiny sized, which is actually really good. Which means basically at a certain point you're not going to have to worry about too much of a negative. At most, by 20th level, you will have is lowering down your plant shape and your elemental body form on its own, which isn't too bad, especially if you're a more animal-based druid, because there are several different ways to even play the spellcasting variation. When playing the spellcasting version, you have, of course, multiple different spells to your arsenal. You won't be really wild shaping and going too much in combat if you play it right. If you use wild shape, it'll primarily be to basically make sure the enemy can't actually come upon you easily. And with that, it primarily depends on what type of druid, spellcaster type you want to actually play. There is Battlefield Controller, which, of course, as we've already went over, you have your entanglement spells, which are really good, and there's more than just that, mind you. It's just those are the primarily notable ones. in my opinion. After that, you have a healer. Since you gain so many healing spells, you can actually play the role of a support character very easily, removing status conditions and healing the party from the damage, and also buffing slightly. Because the fact is, you do gain certain buffing spells like Bear's Endurance, Bull Strength, so on and so forth. But that's not all that you can actually do with it. I highly suggest actually looking at the spells and the different feats you actually will want to take with a druid and explore with it, because you can make a bad druid, but the fact is, even a bad druid is actually relatively good in its own rights and respects. They are a little bit of everything to a degree. They can heal, they can change their form to be a front-up fighter, so basically they can be a tank if they need to. You can be the support character. There's so many ways you can play a druid. I highly suggest it's exploring it. Now, when it comes down to more of the wild shapes, some notable wild shapes I suggest you actually going into, besides the elemental forms, it's actually going into, like, Dire Lion is one good example. You can actually get the abilities to claw, bite, but you can actually charge at your full speed and be able to still get your attacks off. That's one benefit there. The movement speed is actually pretty good. Other notables, you can actually, like a polar bear, and depending on what type of druid you are and DM you're running with, depends if you can actually use some of the dinosaur forms. They are animals. That one you have to talk more to your DM on. But besides that, you're actually good. Now, with a combination one, I highly suggest actually using a form a lot like the wolf, or like a polar bear or something like that. So you can actually be really good there. So you actually have decent endurance, you have decent strength for your damage, but you can also be better with your dexterity to not be hit as often. I know the natural armor can actually counteract that, but that's something just to take into consideration. One last thing to note when you're actually playing a combination. If you actually drop any weapon that you actually are proficient with, and then turn into the form of like a ape, like a gorilla, you can actually use them that way. Pick them up afterwards. In doing so, you're an ape with a scimitar or a spear, whatever you use. That is ultimately one of the better things when it comes down to your wild shape to a degree. Now, one of the best part about the wild shape is the fact is you get 1 hour per level instead of the minutes duration of the standard spells, which is a really nice thing on its own. When going up in levels, there are several different ways to play. Improved crit would be a good option for any character that has a decent melee based attack bonus. One thing you need to actually keep in mind though is you're not always going to be good at everything. You're not exactly a bard exactly when it comes down to you can fill any role role. Alchemist is the same way roughly. You can fill most roles, and it's a little difficult to actually make a bad version of them, but it gives you plenty of options to work with. Explore the druid. Now, it's easy to basically think they're actually not too good of a class compared to certain other character classes. There are certain better ones. In the grander scheme of things, a sorcerer could actually do it better, or a wizard could do it better. It depends on if you actually specialize for it. I say sorcerer because spontaneous is so powerful thing to have. I know you lack the spells, but you can use the one you have pretty much any time you want as long as you have a spell slot. So that's a good thing there. But when it comes down to duration, the druid has pretty much every class beat. Now, as some notable archetypes I can actually say that I've actually looked through and enjoy a bit, you have like the Seasoned Sage. The Seasoned Sage trades off their wild shape for more control of nature, it's more of a nature feel. Dinosaur Druid, they actually specialize in wild shape into a dinosaur, and there's just so many options. So explore. Don't be afraid to ultimately have things that are going to actually be a little weird sometimes, especially to a druid. Explore the feats, explore the wild shape feature, spells, and you'll figure out what type of druid you want to play. So yeah, this has been a guide to, well, kind of guide to druid of sorts. So I highly suggest you go take a look. And yeah, okay. Thank you for watching this video. Hope you have a nice day.